Gary Lineker and me told to stay away from the BBC. Who am I? I'm Mike Cashman, and with the very musically talented and witty Augusta Lees, we've written It's My Party and I'll Lie If I Want To, that aims with satire and parody to expose some of the ridiculous aspects of our government, and does have links via QR codes to more than 120 videos of Augusta singing and playing in half the cases, or a sketch from me. But anyway, this video is about the Gary Lineker event and mentioning my ejection from the BBC as well on 31st of January, but chiefly Gary Lineker. Now, when this news first broke, my initial reaction was Gary's been a little bit extreme in what he's said, but from a freedom of speech point of view, I believe he should be entitled to say it. Actually, since then, I've read an analysis by MichaelRosenYes, for example, which suggests that Gary Lineker chose his words rather carefully. So he didn't say that the Tory policy was like that in Germany in the 30s or the 40s. He didn't call the Tories Nazis. He didn't say that their actions were similar. He said that the language being used around the illegal immigration bill was not dissimilar to the language of 1930s Germany. And language is a significant point because the persecutions that followed started with language, and he does draw a parallel with, in both cases, the policy being to ship people off to some place in Africa. So there was some substance, there was some justification in what he said, but the issue here really is free speech. Now, the question of impartiality comes up, and Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, has made great play of the fact that he seeks to be very impartial. How do you demonstrate being impartial? You might have a prior track record in a relevant field of demonstrating impartiality. I don't believe that's the case for Tim Davie or Richard Sharp, the BBC chairman, whose qualifications to be chairman I can't quite work out. But it might be that in actually fulfilling the role, you demonstrate time after time that you're acting impartially. That's not the case with the BBC in recent years. So Alan Sugar, Karen Brady, for example, can tweet support for the government quite freely without any action being taken. When Gary Lineker tweets in a way that is critical of the government, then the BBC, for a sports presenter, took action to tell him not to come in for Match of the Day. And people have talked about the finer points of the BBC's policy in this matter. There is one point which I think is worth bringing up here, which is related to the fact that Gary Lineker has a freelance contract, but it's not just the fact that he has a freelance contract. In my experience, when signing a permanent contract of employment, the potentially employee may well have to sign up to say that they will agree to whatever policies the employer brings in the future. They don't get the chance to choose policy by policy. In the case of a freelance contract for a fixed term, in my experience, it is more usual for the policies that are going to apply to be appended to the contract at the time of signing. Now, I haven't examined Gary Lineker's contract in detail, and I suspect that most of those who've commented on this haven't either. But if it was of the latter sort, then anything that Tim Davie wrote as BBC policy after Tim Davie arrived, which is after Gary Lineker's freelance contract started, would have no legal impact on what Gary Lineker could or could not tweet. But it is wider than that, because even if there was a fine point by which Tim Davie could claim that he was entitled to, in effect, censor Gary Lineker's tweets while giving Alan Sugar and Karen Brady, for example, there are others, but giving them free rein, then I think the court of public opinion would then start to say, no, look, you're splitting hairs there. So he has not been impartial. The BBC chair is under suspicion of not being impartial either, and is under investigation at the moment. There were rumours that he might resign during this. I'm not surprised that he's waiting for the outcome of the investigation. But there is a question of conflict of interest. And look, I've dealt with conflicts of interest from both sides of the fence before. And if you have something which you consider might be a minor conflict of interest, then it's very clear how you deal with it. You declare it to the other party, the interviewers, for example, and you say, look, this may be something fairly minor, but I thought I ought to let you know. And the interviewers, for example, may well then say, right, well, thanks for letting us know. We agree it's minor. Okay, but we are informed about it. Thank you. Richard Sharp chose not to declare his conflict of interest in his interview for BBC Chairman. We know that he specifically chose not to declare it because he discussed this with Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, beforehand. So this was not something that he thought he could put on the table and would not have a significant impact. The fact that he chose to conceal it suggests that he thought that it would be a major barrier to him being appointed. And in my view, it should have been, but it's not my view that counts, it's the view of the interviewers. So we have a chairman who concealed a conflict of interest that would be the reason for him favouring the government. We have a Director General, also with a Tory background, who has not acted impartially. We also have the board member, Robbie Gibb, who, according to some accounts, has interfered with BBC editorial policy. My prior stance on BBC impartiality was certainly that I wanted to view the BBC as impartial. I wanted to believe that they were. Look, I even wrote an article for Central Bylines that was anecdotally defending the impartiality of Question Time, though there have been other analyses done on the makeup of the panel, which perhaps refute my arguments. But, look, this is where I was coming from. But the evidence is very much to the contrary. Now, I've talked about my ejection from the audience of the Today programme, not allowed to be in the audience, even though all I wanted to do was listen to the debate and, obviously applaud, cheer at various points. I'm not equating my profile with that of Gary Lineker, but at the point at which I was told that I had to leave the building or was let out of the building, told I couldn't come back in, there's a sort of chill sense of discrimination at that point. Now, you might say that in saying that I had been at a protest earlier in the day, as the BBC characterised it, that their exclusion was for anybody who had been at any protest in any political direction. But to be honest, protests are more likely to be opposed to the government. So if you are discriminating against protesters, then you are probably discriminating in favour of the government. As I say, I'm not equating the two events, but I have, in other fields, experienced discrimination that I think was invalid, but on the basis of my political views. This country is less tolerant than it was 8 years ago, in my experience. And we could do with impartiality. We could do with impartiality at the BBC. And for those who have demonstrated that they are not impartial, Richard Sharp, Tim Davie, Robbie Gibb, I think they should resign, because I think impartiality is important. Etched on the wall on the BBC, outside the BBC entrance, Gary Lineker was photographed with this lately, is if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. We are facing a policy at the moment where people are to be transported to Rwanda without trial. So transportation was government policy up until 1868, but even then you actually got a trial before being transported. The policy that's proposed now is transportation without trial, and I think that it is fair that people have a chance to speak in opposition to that. Thank you.